Systematic Review of Physical Activity and Fitness in School-Aged Children and Youth by Ian Jansen. Background. For this systematic review, it looked at Canada's physical activity guidelines for children and youth. For the first guideline, it recommended to increase the amount of time spent with physical activity by 30 minutes a day, and in 5 months progress to improve the amount of physical activity to 90 minutes more per day. For the second one, 5 to 10 minutes of physical activity can be performed in increments throughout the day. For the third guideline, after 5 months of progress, the 90-minute increase in physical activity should include 60 minutes of moderate activity such as walking, skating, or biking, and 30 minutes of vigorous activities such as running, basketball, football, or soccer. For the fourth guideline, it recommended to perform different types of physical activities such as cardiorespiratory, mobility, and strength. This will provide positive health results. For the fifth guideline, it recommended to decrease sedentary time spent watching TV, video games, and surfing the internet for 90 minutes less per day for 5 months. The purpose of this study was to complete a systematic review of different studies examining the relation between physical activity, fitness, and health in school-aged children and youth. The second purpose was to make recommendations based on the articles and findings. The overview of this systematic review provides a summary on the existing physical activity guidelines for children and youth, as explaining the scientific evidence between the guideline development process. Guideline 1 was for children aged 6 to 9 years old. Guideline 2 was youth aged 10 to 14 years old. This systematic review was sponsored by the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, and was developed by a multidisciplinary expert panel. In this systematic review, around 850 published articles were considered. Some questions addressed in the systematic review was how much volume and physical activity is needed for the minimal health benefits in school-aged children and youth. What types of activity are needed to produce health benefits, aerobic, anaerobic, or resistance? What is appropriate physical activity intensity? And do the effects of physical activity on health in school-aged children and youth vary by sex or age? Methods. The systematic review measured only specific health outcomes that were known to be related in physical activity in school-aged children and youth. The health outcome for high blood cholesterol and high blood pressure and metabolism was used as a measure for cardiometabolic risk. The health outcome of overweight and obesity was used as a measure of adiposity. Lone bone density was used as a measure of skeletal health. Depression was measured and categorized in mental health, and injuries that have a negative effect on the health of physical activity. The search strategies used for this systematic review was literature searches and electronic searches with the Google Researcher. Below is the search engines used and the terms typed in the search bar. Data abstraction. The data was abstracted from full text citations using the electronic data abstraction form. The data abstraction was completed in a Microsoft Access database, and the data included information on the study design, participants, details of the physical activity, measures or interventions, and key findings. Figure 1 shows the copy of electronic abstract review form used in the systematic review. Figure 2 shows a copy of the electronic database abstraction form. The goal of this systematic review was to use a rigorous, evidence-based technique to show the evidence on the relation between physical activity and health in school-aged children that could be used as recommendations for the specific volume, intensity, and type of physical activity needed. At the time when this systematic review was performed, there was no universally accepted method for formulating evidence-based recommendations. Literature review results. Figure 3 shows the articles used for the systematic review. For each of the 7 health outcomes, several citations were used. The 7 health outcomes were cholesterol, depression, injury, bone density, blood pressure, obesity, and metabolic syndrome. For cholesterol, 501 were identified and 437 were used after duplicates. For depression, 1,349 were identified and 1,151 were used after duplicates. For injury, 2,933 were identified and 2,505 were used after duplicates. For bone density, 1,585 were identified and only 1,181 were used after duplicates. For blood pressure, 2,000 were identified and only 1,677 were used after duplicates. For obesity, 7,603 were identified and only 5,824 were used after duplicates. For metabolic syndrome, 2,000 were identified and only 1,677 were used after duplicates. Results. For cholesterol and blood lipids, a total of 9 articles that examined blood lipids and lipoproteins met the inclusion criteria. For high blood pressure, a total of 11 articles examining high blood pressure met the systematic review inclusion criteria. For metabolic syndrome, a total of 16 articles examining the metabolic syndrome met the inclusion criteria. For overweight and obesity, a total of 31 observational studies, 24 cross-sectional, 3 prospective cohort, 2 case control, and 1 mixed met the inclusion criteria. For bone mineral density, a total of 11 experimental studies were used in the systematic review. For depression, a total of 6 studies on depression and related symptoms met the inclusion criteria. For injuries, a total of 3 articles examining injury met the inclusion criteria for this systematic review. Discussion. Recommendations were made based on the systematic review results. For the first recommendation, children and youth between the ages of 5 to 17 should perform at an average of at least 60 minutes a day and up to several hours of moderate intensity physical activity. By doing so, health benefits can be achieved through an average of 30 minutes per day. For the second recommendation, more vigorous intensity physical activities should be performed when given the chance, including activities that strengthen muscle and bone. For the third recommendation, aerobic activities should take up most of the physical activity. Muscle and bone strengthening activities should be performed at least 3 days a week. For the conclusion of the systematic review, it was found that physical activity can help with improving health benefits in school-aged children and youth. It showed that the more physical activity is performed, the greater the health benefit. The results from several different articles showed that moderate amounts of physical activity can even have a positive effect in youth that are at risk, such as ones with obesity and high blood pressure. In order to achieve these health benefits, physical activity should at least be performed at a moderate intensity, and performing physical activity at a vigorous intensity can provide an even greater health benefit. Aerobic-based activities that stress the cardiovascular and respiratory systems were shown to have the greatest health benefit. Some limitations of the systematic review were practical issues such as budget, human resource, and time constraints. The systematic review did not include unpublished studies and studies that were published in any language other than English. This could have eliminated many articles because extensive cross-referencing of the references list was not performed. The systematic review only looked at 7 health outcomes and did not include several other outcomes that may be relevant for children and youth, such as academic performance and environmental risk factors such as bullying and substance abuse. Implications. Since only 7 outcomes were reviewed in this study, the data could have been much different if it was not limited to just those 7. For example, depression was the only mental health outcome reviewed. It was expected that any type of physical activity would provide health benefits, and was expected that vigorous activity provide the greatest health benefits. Here are the references.